Dr. Christopher West here, the Theology of the Body guy. In the last couple videos, we looked at how contraception has negatively impacted culture and society. But aren't we overlooking a host of benefits? Hasn't contraception liberated women, brought equality between the sexes, and allowed couples to enjoy sex without fear of unwanted pregnancy? Let's take a look. We're continuing our series looking at my book, Good News About Sex and Marriage, Answers to Your Honest Questions About Catholic Teaching. We're in Chapter 6. Let's take a look at how women's liberation and equality between the sexes and the joy of sex is affected by contraception. What does it mean for women to be liberated? I say here on page 114, and if you want to follow along, there's a link to the book in the notes. What does it mean for women to be liberated? What is equality between the sexes? What is the joy of sex? Women's liberation. History has demonstrated what the book of Genesis foretold. Men will dominate women. Women are absolutely right to seek liberation from that kind of domination, right? But if the real problem behind women's oppression is men's failure to treat them properly as persons, contraception is a sure way to keep women in chains. Remove the possibility of pregnancy from the sexual equation, and it's going to do nothing but foster men's tendencies to treat women as objects for their selfish pleasure. And when they've had their pleasure, there's always the temptation to say, "See ya, I'm done with you." Fertility, as wise men and women have understood throughout human history, is what compels us to honor and respect the God-given nature and purpose of sexuality. Remove that, and we end up treating one another like objects. The early feminists understood this. For example, this is back in the 19th and into the 20th century. Women such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Victoria Woodhull, and Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell all spoke out against contraception. These are the earliest feminist writers. They saw it as further degradation of women since it gave men license to indulge their passions without consequence. In a calamitous break with the wisdom of their predecessors, modern feminists would actually come to believe that contraception was the key to women's liberation. Only after the casualties of the sexual revolution have some modern feminists awakened to the delusion. Germaine Greer, for example, who once encouraged her followers to revel in the liberties afforded them by the pill, she says now, lamenting, contraceptive technology, instead of liberating women, has turned them into call girls who risk health and fertility in order to be readily available for meaningless sex. The lights have turned on for her in that regard. My brothers and sisters, think about it. Remove fertility from the sexual equation, and we no longer honor woman as God created her to be. And this brings us to the next point about equality between the sexes. The argument goes that contraception is necessary for equality between the sexes. But hold on. If technology is what affords equality between the sexes, then equality between the sexes is not something that comes from God. It's something we invent. And here we have to recognize that equality does not mean sameness. Contraception is actually opposed to woman's true equality. True, equally dignified personhood is what we mean. But equally dignified personhood recognizes the distinction and the purpose of the distinction between men and women. Contraception, in fact, its very premise is to turn women into something they're not designed to be. The kind of being who can have sex and not get pregnant. Well, what kind of being is that? That's called a man, right? Here we are confusing equality with sameness. Think about it. If women, in order to claim equality with a man, have to make themselves more and more like a man, then aren't they already buying into the lie that they are not equal in dignity as women? If we buy into the idea of equality means sameness, well then yeah, we need the technology to turn a woman into a man. And isn't that what the culture is pushing for? But if we recognize God-given equal dignity in the sexual difference, contraception becomes the gutting of woman, the robbing her of her true dignity as a woman. And so I want to argue that men will only treat women as equal in dignity when they come to appreciate woman's unique giftedness as God made her to be, and they stop seeking to turn women into something they're not. What would the world look like if we rejoiced in the fact that sex leads to babies and that women carry them? What would it look like? What would the world look like if we rejoiced in the fact that women can become pregnant from the union of a man and a woman? What would the world look like if we directed all of our choices and decisions in this realm towards honoring that fact, towards protecting the beauty of that truth? The world would be a different place where women and children are honored. Something to think about. How about the joy of sex? Does contraception really afford a new joy in sex? Let's take a look. I want to argue that the true joy of sex comes from loving as God loves. Jesus gives us the new commandment, love one another as I have loved you. I tell you this so that my joy might be in you and your joy might be complete. There's no greater joy than loving as God loves. And God loves freely, totally, faithfully, and fruitfully. This, I want to argue, is the true joy of sex. From this perspective, couples who use contraception don't really enjoy sex at all. They may enjoy the pleasure of orgasm exchange, but they don't really enjoy sex as God created it to be. In fact, the couple who uses contraception, from one perspective, isn't really even having sex. They don't want to have sex. They're afraid of having sex. If they weren't, they wouldn't be trying to alter the sexual act itself. They're afraid of what real sexual union demands of them. And so contraception doesn't relieve people of their fears. It demonstrates exactly how afraid they really are of what sex really is. And so I want to argue only true love can cast out fear. And only true love can bring real joy. If you're only in it for the physical pleasure of an orgasm, well then let's be honest about that. That's what contraception is doing. It's gutting the union that God created it to be so that a man and woman can enjoy the physical sensation of an orgasm without the commitment and the responsibility of what real sexual union calls them to. Are there some benefits that have come to the world from contraception? Sure, but trying to justify contraception by pointing them out would be like trying to justify the pornography industry by pointing to the fact that it creates jobs. There are other morally acceptable ways to promote jobs. And whatever good has come into the world through contraception, there are morally acceptable ways of achieving that same good without embracing the evil of contraception. The basic principle is this: we may never do evil so that good results. My brothers and sisters, I know this message is so contrary to what our world is teaching us. And if what our world was teaching us brought real joy and real love and real freedom and real equality between the sexes and real liberation to women, I'd say go for it. But I think when we take a deeper look, we can recognize that the vision that the Catholic Church holds out to us, that men and women are equal in dignity in their difference, and the idea that they're coming together, leading to new life, is not some flaw that needs to be overcome, but a great mystery that needs to be reverenced and respected. That this is what leads to true liberation. Liberation from the oppression of lies that tell us that the value of a human being comes from the sexual excitement and pleasure he or she can offer someone else. No, the value of a human being comes from the fact that we are called to eternal union with God. And the union of man and woman is meant to be a little glimmer in this world of that glorious dignity and that glorious destiny. Heaven, the marriage of the Lamb, the marriage of God and humanity, where we participate in the eternally life-giving love of God. What would the world look like if we lived our sexuality as a reflection of that heavenly destiny? That's the invitation the Catholic Church holds out to all of us. I have so much more to unpack for you about this glorious vision and how we can embrace it and how we can overcome the lies that have lodged in our hearts that keep us from recognizing the true dignity of our creation as male and female. I encourage you to learn more by checking out our patron community at the link below, and check out the online and in-person courses that we offer through the Theology of the Body Institute. Until next time, may our eyes continue to be opened to the glorious truth of who we really are as men and women made in the image and likeness of God.